Black Ops 6's campaign story is for the most part an unrelenting rollercoaster of espionage and balls-to-the-wall action, but it also takes some unusually surprising turns and raises several big questions that it doesn't ultimately resolve. While the bulk of the game's missions follow the pattern we've come to expect from Call of Duty stories, albeit in the best possible way and with a few great twists, there is one mission in particular which felt like it took a hard left turn into absurdity. And while I think this mannequin-filled fever dream is interesting in and of itself, it is worth asking whether it really fits within this narrative, or whether it ends up hurting what might otherwise be one of the best single-player experiences in the entire series. Obviously, there will be spoilers ahead. In Black Ops 6's story, we learn some dark secrets about the game's taciturn protagonist, William Case Calderon, but we never ascertain what it all really means. We see zombies and hideous creatures and experience the odd results of a mysterious bioweapon, but we never discover the full truth. We fight against the only other character who also knows about Case's past, but that conflict ends before those details begin to matter, and the story concludes more suddenly than it feels like it should. So what exactly is going on with Black Ops 6's weirdest mission? And why is it that Case's strange background becomes almost irrelevant by the end of the story?
Hang on, I've got... Hey!
Set in 1991 and following on from the events of both Black Ops Cold War and Black Ops 2, the story of Black Ops 6 centers on a team of rogue operatives, led by the previously bandana-wearing Frank Woods and esteemed sunglasses wearer Russell Adler, as they track down the enigmatic organization known as Pantheon, along with the biological weapon they have been secretly developing and planning to deploy. For the majority of the campaign, the player assumes the role of William Case Calderon, who is a mostly silent protagonist, aside from occasional in-game dialogue choices, during which you're free to pretend that he sounds like just about anyone, from Arnold Schwarzenegger to SpongeBob SquarePants. As an ever-dutiful operative, Case helps recruit the Dream Team to join the ex-CIA crew in their Bulgarian safe house, before tracking down a mysterious weapon known as the Cradle in a heavily guarded bunker in Iraq. Then, based on some notes they find in the bunker, alongside the sample canister, it's revealed that the Cradle originated in a research facility in Kentucky where Adler briefly worked. So, Case, Troy, and Sev head to the US of A to infiltrate this facility. And here's where things start to get a bit strange. After falling down an elevator shaft, Case finds himself on the lowest floor of the facility, with a broken gas mask. And, after inhaling the fumes left over from the incident which originally led to the site being evacuated and abandoned, he begins hallucinating. First of all, some classic Black Ops mannequins come to life and start giving him funny looks. And then, once he finds himself in the grand atrium of this dramatic underground structure, he is suddenly attacked by strange zombies who seem to phase in and out of different familiar states. What starts off feeling just a bit creepy then slowly evolves into a nightmarish sequence of inexplicable madness. The bulk of this mission felt like something out of Remedy Games' control, through the lens of Call of Duty, and in many ways I thought it was kind of brilliant, but equally it did feel out of place in this story for a few reasons. The aesthetic of this facility, presumably as a result of the era in which it was seemingly built, feels completely distinct from the world of casinos and war zones in the rest of the game, and the gameplay does too. Early on, you find yourself picking up a grappling hook, for one thing, and you'll need it to navigate these levels and deal with the zombie hordes too. Then there's the boss battle with a shape-shifting mimic straight out of Prey, and the other fights with big bulky zombie guys, and you can even find yourself chased around a room by mannequins. There is not, as far as I can tell, a specific reason why Case is seeing zombies and moving mannequins, but it is obviously a nice homage to Treyarch's love of zombies and to the mannequins in Black Ops 3's Nuketown. Either way, I do think this level is pretty awesome, but it's also just incredibly bizarre and does arguably pull you out of the main story too much. The entire campaign of Black Ops 6 is very interesting in that, to some degree, it feels like every mission is bringing its own strange idea to the table, either gameplay-wise or story-wise, almost like they were each developed independently by teams with many different goals. This results in a series of tonal shifts throughout, which I think are mostly very welcome, as they add a fair amount of variety to the gameplay, though it does leave the whole product feeling a little bit disjointed. There's the open world Iraq section, the Pantheon disguise wearing section with a Sherlock Holmes style dialogue minigame, and then there's this zombies mannequin section. Obviously, the implication in this sequence is that all of the strange things you can see are just hallucinations resulting from Case inhaling the cradle in the air. We've seen similar wacky hallucination sequences in games before, and they're always a little bit odd, but the things that make this mission different are, firstly, that you're hallucinating consistently for a significant amount of time, and secondly, that you're simultaneously learning some very important details about William Case Calderon, namely that his nickname seemingly originated from his time spent in the very facility you're left to explore, where he was Case 1, the first and last test subject for the original incarnation of the cradle, when it was intended to be a performance-enhancing drug. Apparently, the tests didn't go too good, and as well as turning him into a sort of super soldier, they also sent Case completely insane, before he eventually apparently sabotaged the facility by releasing the gas, requiring its swift shutdown and the termination of all further trials. And then William Calderon was somehow rehabilitated, only to find himself working on a rogue operation many years later that would require he return home to the facility. All that said, then, it seems clear that beyond the zombie mirages, there are some very important revelations to be found here. This level ties the campaign's hero to the story's greatest threat in a big way, for a start. But beyond that, this mission also exposes the origins of Pantheon as a CIA division working within the facility to develop dangerous experimental projects. When Case picks up the phones around the facility, he hears the voice of a Pantheon scientist he interacted with during the experiments, and all throughout the mission, a voice in his head reminds him of his time there as a test subject. Both before and after this mission, there are also other instances where Case hears this voice in his head, a clear remnant of the cradle's impact on his psyche, and seemingly the inspiration for his violent urges and killer instincts. Once the player has collected all the keycards they need to operate the elevator in the atrium, they are finally reunited with the rest of their crew, after a bit more zombie fighting, when Troy shakes some sense back into the frenzied William Calderon. Then, they all go on to discover that the leftover canisters of Cradle have already been harvested by modern-day Pantheon, before they head off to follow the next clue onto the next mission. What with Case being generally pretty untalkative, he evidently decides not to tell any of his buddies that he was a test subject for the Cradle. And weirdly enough, no one else on the team ever finds out through other means either. Not even Russell Adler, who apparently briefly worked at the facility. But there is one other character who does know about Case's history with the Kentucky-born performance-enhancing drug known as the Cradle. And as the story continues and eventually concludes, it only makes Case's experience seem even more peculiar.
Test subject 18 has been infected with the cradle.
After leaving the land of mannequins and zombies, Case and the crew break into an Avalon casino vault to find the records they need to locate the scientist who will help them find where the cradle is being kept. When they get there, though, it turns out the canisters of the cradle have already been moved, and instead they end up kidnapping their former associate turned traitor to the CIA and Pantheon member, Jane Harrow. The final mission of Black Ops 6 then ends up being a last stand fight at the Bulgarian safe house, intercut with a strange dreamlike sequence set inside Jane Harrow's mind, as her true self tries to piece together her origin story in order to reveal where Pantheon is planning to deploy the cradle. The Jane Harrow's mind levels here are definitely a bit strange, consisting mostly of fighting dozens of violent Jane Harrow clones in dark, strange places, and collecting shards of a mirror. But through a series of flashbacks, the sequence does do a pretty good job of justifying her defection to Pantheon. Jane then eventually reveals that the cradle has been placed in the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. And it's at this point that many players will probably expect that they're about to infiltrate the Capitol building and disable the cradle dispersion device before it can be activated, in one final thrilling mission for William Case Calderon, where he'll be forced to put an end to the drug that made him the man he is once and for all. Unfortunately, that's not the case, though. Instead, Pantheon managed to free Harrow and rush her to a helicopter to make their escape. Then, Case is left to chase her down, jump on board, and after the pilot is accidentally shot, kill Harrow inside the helicopter as it sinks to the bottom of the ocean with them both inside. He does so, in the end, with the voice in his head egging him on, and by using a canister of the cradle as a blunt weapon. And here, it's also implied that Harrow knows all the details of Case's test subject experience with the cradle, which would definitely be very interesting, if not for the fact that immediately after we learn this, William Calderon beats and then strangles Harrow to death, under the influence of the cradle in an uncontrollable frenzy of fear and anger. And then, presumably, he drowns in the wreckage of the helicopter, and the story reaches its conclusion, with just a brief epilogue left where Livingston endorses the leftover crew as an independent covert team, working to find and defeat the rest of Pantheon. I don't, on the whole, actively dislike this ending, because it does have plenty of good action, it does technically wrap up the central conflict well enough, and it's sort of nice that things end in the safe house where you've spent so much of the game gearing up and chatting with your team. But the way it sets up Washington DC as the target of this attack, and then eliminates that threat just a few minutes later with a simple phone call, as Case and Harrow drown in a helicopter, just feels a bit anticlimactic. Especially in a game which has so many brilliant and bombastic set pieces, and is generally paced pretty well. There is a nice poetry to Case going out with the power of the cradle coursing through his veins, but I think they could have done so much more with the cradle as a plot device if Livingston hadn't been willing to evacuate the capital and Case had to end things in Washington DC instead, while revealing his past to the rest of the team. If Black Ops 6's story had been on the shorter side, if the campaign hadn't apparently benefited from an unusually long Call of Duty dev time, and if there hadn't been several missions which felt like they could have been cut without hurting the story, then I might have believed they were forced to cut out a final Washington DC level from the game in order to release it on time. But aside from this ending, Black Ops 6's single player story feels like a completely uncompromised experience. Unlike Modern Warfare 3's truncated, messy campaign, it is a substantial, richly detailed and multifaceted journey, making this final mission and the conclusion to Case's story all the more difficult to understand. It's probably safe to assume that certain elements of the story will be resolved through cutscenes in Warzone, as has happened before. But I really hope they don't end up reserving too many revelations and conclusions exclusively for that mode, because it hurts the integrity of the overarching plot across all of the campaigns, in my opinion. I think it's great to expand the story outward with extra details outside of the main stories, but I don't like the idea that they're spreading out important narrative beats in temporary seasonal content as well as in campaign missions. The team continuing to fight Pantheon past the main story is fine, but William Case Calderon deserved a better conclusion to his journey, whether they're planning for him to return or not. His eventual resilience to the effects of the cradle could have made him the last man capable of shutting it down. His experience within the facility could have made him the only one with the information required to neutralize the weapon. But ultimately, the threat that the cradle poses within the story is neutralized without its connection to Case or its inherently unique qualities ever really becoming relevant. If you ignored the mission set inside Pantheon's advanced technologies and applications, and the revelations about Case himself, then the role that the cradle plays within the story could be filled by any other weapon of mass destruction. Without its specific features coming into play, and without Case's past becoming a problem or a solution within the narrative, the truth about this biological weapon is never really relevant. And that makes the tonal shift of the zombie mannequin facility feel even more unnecessary within the campaign. In the end then, Black Ops 6's strangest mission is a fascinating inclusion that is a lot of fun to play through and provides plenty of revelations, but as great as it is in and of itself, it's unfortunate that it doesn't end up affecting the outcome of the story as much as it probably should. And instead, it feels like an odd diversion in the midst of a series of more familiar, classic Call of Duty styled missions, which tend to be more cautiously inventive. I would love to see an entire campaign which expands on the style and tone of this Zombies and Mannequins mission, but I don't know for sure that as it stands, it fits in well with the rest of Black Ops 6's story. But what did you think of Black Ops 6's campaign and Case as a protagonist? Let me know in the comments, and please do like and subscribe if you'd like to hear me talk more stories and more video games. Otherwise, I'll see you next time around.